Welcome home. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We are Baltimore positive. It is a divisional playoff week here. I've been at this a long, long time, 34 years of doing radio. We're in our 26, almost 27 years now of WNST. And I think about big playoff games around here, and we've had some heavyweights. I mean, any of the Brady Flacco, but Flacco is never perceived as being Lamar Jackson or a Hall of Famer or any of that. We're in a different space here where we've won championships. We're going to Buffalo where they've never won championships. We talked about Pittsburgh a little bit over the weekend where it's been a long time since they won a championship. Philadelphia's in play. Washington's in play all of a sudden again. Detroit where they've never won. It's a big Final Eight around here. Luke Jones going to be monitoring all things Ravens and Buffalo in the late Sunday evening game. We'll all be Houston Texans fans on Saturday afternoon in the hopes of getting another AFC championship game here. It wouldn't be against Kansas City if it were here. And meantime, full disclosure, Luke and I have flights held for Kansas City next weekend, mainly because I love Kansas City and barbecue and Arrowhead Stadium and all of that. But how are you? How are you holding up here? This is for 50 weeks, you're like, nothing means anything till they start winning play. Nothing means anything. Well, here we are, and they were very impressive the other day. And if there's a track toward Purple Rain 3, and you're writing and I'm not, they certainly have made the right move. And if they are eliminated on Sunday night, it won't be because injury, attrition, not good enough. They're built to win. They're good enough to win a Super Bowl. Now, whether they will over the next 3 games, and they've made the toughest path you can make, going through Buffalo, going through Kansas City, rooting for Houston, as an 8.5-point dog to help you out or whatever. Yeah, if they win a Super Bowl, they will have earned it.
No question about it. And I mean, I can remember saying to you tongue in cheek, but also having some sincerity in saying it at various times throughout the offseason where I made the point that they've gone the number one seed home field advantage route twice and have come up short. And as disappointing as it was, look, it happens, right? I mean, the other team tries too. And if you're not at your best and the ball doesn't bounce your way, you're going to get beat. And I mean, that's going to be the story on Sunday night for the Bills or the Ravens, right? I mean, they might both be at their best, and it's still going to come down to one team wins and the other loses. But I made the point that maybe them having a path that's not as envious, them having a path where they're going on the road, where they're perceived as an underdog. Although, again, Vegas isn't disrespecting them. I mean, someone has to be an underdog. And as of Sunday night, it was the Ravens being a 1-point underdog. They're the road team. I get it. Even if you point to week 4 and say, well, the Ravens won big back in week 4. It's also 3.5 months ago. So a lot's changed. And that's not to say the Ravens aren't going to win. But, you if you're writing the book and you look at it and say, well, they got past Pittsburgh, who, for whatever reason, and we understand circumstances were strange at various times over the last 5 years with COVID, with resting starters, with Lamar being hurt. But we know, I mean, the Steelers had their number for a while, and they beat them back in week 16, and then they beat them emphatically on Saturday night. So you check that box. Steelers no longer an issue for the Ravens, at least until they meet next September or October or whenever it is. And now it's Buffalo. Ravens went to Buffalo back in the COVID year, divisional round. Neither Lamar Jackson nor Josh Allen had a particularly great game, but it was Lamar with the back-breaking interception. Teron Johnson returned it, 102 yards for a touchdown, and the Ravens lost. They only scored 3 points in that game. So, it's 4 years later. Since then, both these quarterbacks have only gotten better, and that's quite a compliment because they were both, Lamar was already an MVP at that point, and Josh Allen was trending upward at that point in his career. But, you got to get through Buffalo. In the way that Joe Flacco, for the Ravens to get their shot against New England for the second straight year in the AFC Championship game, they had to get through Peyton Manning and the Broncos. So, the good thing here is the Ravens certainly aren't perceived to be underdogs in the way that Ravens team was. But that Ravens team got the job done regardless. I want to say that I don't know if they were a 10-point favorite, but they were definitely I mean, they were a substantial underdog in that game because remember they had gotten their butts kicked in Baltimore by the Broncos. So, that's the Broncos part of the narrative, so to speak. If you're comparing the 2012 team to this year, and then if you win, and assuming Kansas City beats Houston, which is my expectation. I mean, stranger things have happened, I suppose, but that would be pretty darn surprising to me if the Texans pull off that upset. But if they don't, then you're going to Kansas City. So it sets up for quite the storybook path to Super Bowl to the Super Bowl and going to New Orleans. But the Bills are saying the same thing right now. The Bills are in the same spot where they're trying to have their redemption story and they're finally breaking through
What'd you think of
against
them on Sunday?
the Bills on Sunday. I mean, look, Denver has a good defense, so I think obviously Buffalo squandered some opportunities early in that game. It
It
felt
felt
like,
sputtery. It felt like at halftime you would have said they were playing with their food, and I
yeah,
tweeted that.
I mean, certainly, I mean, what, it was 10-7 at halftime. They should have been up by, yeah, it felt like they could have been up by 10 points rather than only up three. But, again, I think Denver was way better at this point in the season than Pittsburgh was, for example. So you give the Broncos a little bit of credit. I mean, hey, the Broncos got the explosive play on their opening drive, get the long touchdown, and they're up 7-0. And at the same time, Buffalo ended up scoring 31 unanswered and really seized control of that game in the second half. I mean, their run game's good. It's not historically amazing like the Ravens run game with Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson and that combination, the absolute hell that puts on opposing defenses. But don't sleep on the Bills. I mean, everyone knows Josh Allen can run. We know that. But James Cook has had a heck of a year. And Ty Johnson, while he's not quite as much of the guy that's going to line up and run as a traditional running back, you saw the touchdown catch that he made. He's a weapon out of the backfield. I mean, so if you look at the Ravens and some of the things that give them trouble defensively, it is running backs out of the backfield as a receiver. Ty Johnson can pose that problem, and really that's an extension of the run game, right? So this is a Bills team that uh, we've talked about it. The Ravens have a great run defense. They haven't had issues stopping the run all year until what, the fourth quarter of the Philadelphia game. Very few exceptions that teams have run on them at all. But this is a Bills team that absolutely is capable of running, and we saw them really lean into that. Josh Allen put up really good numbers and had a heck of a game. Don't get me wrong, but James Cook, 23 carries. Ty Johnson, 9 carries in that game. So they got their backs involved, and I thought they played a really sound game offensively, and I thought their defense played well, considering even though he's a rookie, Bo Nix had really been playing at a high level at the end of the year. Other than that opening drive, their defense played well. So, I think a lot of this Bills team, I don't think of them like, oh, they're so much better than the Ravens or anything like that. No, far from it. I think, the Ravens have an outstanding chance to go in there and win. I mean, they proved that in week 4. If you can win home or away in the way that they did week 4, the Ravens should have all the confidence in the world. But that said, this is a Bills team that has been there like they have been in January. And at times, this Bills team has played better than the Ravens have played in January in recent years. I mean, they've had some absolute slobber knockers with the Chiefs. So, Josh Allen's had some great games that they came up short, but you looked at how he played and said there's no shame in how he played. So these two teams are, I said it in a previous segment, they're kindred spirits in the way that they both have had so many highlights and regular season and individual accolades and all that, but they're both chasing Kansas City and they're both trying to break through, and now they're having to fight each other to get that chance to go up against the Chiefs, most likely. So, I thought Buffalo was impressive. Obviously the Ravens were very impressive. Which was more impressive? I mean, I think Denver is better than Pittsburgh at this point, but I'm not. Both teams won in pretty decisive fashion. So I think it's gonna be a challenge. Playing in Orchard Park this time of year is not an easy thing. From the weather to just the atmosphere in general. So the Ravens are going to have to go up there and play at a high level, but the Bills are going to have to play at a really high level if they're going to beat the Ravens.
Luke Jones is here. He will be monitoring all things Ravens all week. If you're not on the WNST text service, it is easy to do. You just text to 410-821-9678. Just text WNST or text join, and you're on. You'll get the breaking news. I guess the big news this week we'll be monitoring, and you'll be monitoring Zay Flowers, right? Like, and the general health of both of these teams and who's going to be on the field and who's not going to be on the field in this matchup. Didn't miss him so much against the Steelers. They ran and ran and ran more until they ran him into submission, really. And that was the game plan. It worked. It was great. I'd like to think that they could be able to run against the Buffalo Bills, and that's something on the road that they would like and have to do on a very cold night. And as I wear my Derrick Henry Oilers Hall of Fame jersey, Derrick Henry, I think tackling Derrick Henry is the story of the game because if the Bills can't do it, they can't win.
Yeah, I mean, look, if he runs for 199 against them like he did back in week 4, then the Ravens are going to be going to the AFC Championship game. Yeah, I think if you're the Bills and you're trying to look at it practically speaking, you're not going to stop Derrick Henry. You're not going to stop Lamar Jackson in the same way that I think it would be quite ambitious to expect the Ravens defense to hold the Bills to 10 points again, right? I mean, especially playing on the road this time around. But you've got to be able to get some stops. You can't let them wreck the game, right? I mean, that's, if you're the Bills, if Derrick Henry runs for 200, he's wrecking the game. If Derrick Henry runs for 120, then we'll see, right? We'll see. If you hold him to 70, then boy, you're putting a lot on Lamar Jackson then, especially if they don't have Zay Flowers on Sunday night, and we'll see what his status is over the course of the week. On the flip side, I mean, the Ravens, one thing that they were able to do in that week 4 game that was so impressive was they were really able to get after Josh Allen. He was sacked 3 times in that game. Go look at how many times he was sacked all year. That Bills offensive line's really good. So I think a key for this game is not just pressuring Josh Allen, but in the same way that every team talks about that with Lamar Jackson, you have to do it in a way to keep him caged in, right? You can pressure these guys. I mean, the Ravens, Lamar Jackson's pressured pretty frequently, right? And I don't say that as like a terrible indictment of the Ravens offensive line, but it's not a traditional pass set kind of team. Lamar gets pressured, and then what does he do? He escapes and he buys time, and sometimes he'll take off, and other times he'll run around for 5 seconds and then find
He
a wide
gets
open.
sacked too, by the way. He's gotten trapped more than you think he has, Lamar.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he has, but not nearly as much as it could be, right? And
But he
part of that
also
is
doesn't drop back to pass 51 times.
he doesn't, but he also holds the ball way longer than other quarterbacks. And look, there's a reward to that, but there's also some times where he's going to take a sack and probably wasn't on the offensive line. So, it's a give take. I mean, both these quarterbacks are so unique. That's why, as much as I don't even want to get into it because the voting's over and this is what matters anyway. But that's why so much of the MVP conversation is so nuanced where you look at it and say, okay, statistically speaking, Lamar absolutely deserves it. But last year, lots of people were saying and advocating for Lamar Jackson to be the MVP, even though statistically he didn't have this overwhelming season. But they said, watch the games, go see what he does. Both these quarterbacks are watch the game kind of quarterbacks, even though they put up amazing numbers. But they're both guys where you just say, just watch them, enjoy what they do, appreciate what they do because it is so unique. I mean, these are wherever either of these guys ultimately ranks in NFL history, who knows? Because they're both young. Hopefully, they both stay healthy
They both
long
have
term.
nude ring fingers, by the way. So let's
They
point
do,
that out.
no doubt, and that's part of it as well. Right now, right? It
Because they
doesn't mean
haven't
it's
been nearly as good at being creative as Patrick Mahomes has been. He's been
well.
better at it.
Patrick Mahomes has just been better and better in January. Has a better coach, and I don't say that to knock John Harbaugh or Sean McDermott, but Andy Reid is a better coach than those two
And
guys.
Steve Spagnuolo is a better defensive coordinator than anyone.
Well, I
Than
mean,
anyone.
Spags has been, especially in Kansas City, the last couple of years. When you kind of think about their transformation and what they were 5 years ago with Tyreek Hill and their offense just being insane, and how the last couple of years it's transitioned from an offense that's still good but far from historic, and now their defense has last year their defense was driving the bus for them. I mean, not that Patrick Mahomes and Kelsey aren't Hall of Fame players,
Well,
but
their defense is going to have to drive the bus when you're trying to beat Allen and Lamar. You can't.
right,
You're not going to do that by letting them score 38 points and
no
saying to
question.
Mahomes, you got to go get 41.
Whereas 5 years ago, their formula was they were going to score 41 against you, right? So you've seen that evolution for them, but we're but to bring it back to what I was talking about with Lamar and Allen, I mean, it's just these are such unique quarterbacks. I mean, where they rank ultimately as far as just how great they're going to be in the history of the game and Hall of Fame and all those different things you want to talk about in terms of just being unique, these are top 10 quarterbacks all time in terms of just how unique they are, how special they are, how different their skill set is compared to what we've seen over the history of the game. I mean, it's and that's what makes it fun,
If
you know?
Johnny Unitas came back and you read Lamar's stats to Johnny, what would he say? He ran for how many yards? How did he do
He
that?
would say, ran for how many yards and you threw how many touchdowns? And then you'd remember that in Johnny Unitas's day, you could mug receivers
Well,
20
yeah,
yards
Johnny would
downfield.
say, are the
Yeah,
rules different?
yeah.
Is he playing 11 on 9?
But he would say, I mean, for both these quarterbacks, the way they run and what they do with their legs, in addition to what they do as passers, and they're both great passers as well. I mean, it's a nightmare, right? I
Well,
mean,
I
these
mean, the
guys are
whole
absolute
notion that,
nightmares.
I grew up thinking Johnny, you drew plays in the dirt. That's why we weren't Dundalk. I don't know if you did that in your neighborhood in Shrewsbury or Essex before that, but we drew up plays in the dirt, we'd say, like that's what they go through all of this coordination and they're gonna do all of this. We're gonna play. And in Allen's case, the quick release of the ball in that West Coast Peyton Manning modern way of snap, move, throw. Tom Brady did a lot of that where you can't sack the quarterback. It's impossible because it's a set play. That and the breakdown of that in the modern era with these three quarterbacks to throw across their bodies against traffic across the field, all breaking all of the rules, throwing while they're moving, um, releasing the ball before the guy gets out of his break. They can do everything, but the things that they can do that a lot of guys couldn't do or weren't allowed to do. I mean, somebody compare whoever did the game. I guess was it Romo or Nance comparing John Elway to Josh Allen. I mean, I'll hear that, and maybe John Elway ran a little bit, but he wasn't. Nobody thinks that John Elway's a running quarterback, even though I watched him every week and he did a lot of running and scrambling and
Yeah.
whatnot. But it's the Mahomes miracle and getting rid of the ball and throwing passes other than Brett Favre. I guess no one else in the history of the game ever threw because they couldn't go back in the huddle and face their guys if they did something crazy like that.
Well, I just think all three of these quarterbacks, and to keep it more on Lamar and Josh Allen, because, if the Ravens win, we're going to be talking about Lamar against Patrick Mahomes for a whole week. But
But they are mirroring what Mahomes has done successfully.
I mean, I think, look, you'll hear coaches talk about this. I've heard Todd Monken talk about this, Greg Roman, obviously, others that are way smarter than I am in terms of breaking down the game. There's quarterbacks running the play that's called by their coordinator and the play that's called in the huddle. And then there's a second play. A quarterback like Joe Flacco or even Tom Brady, as much as Tom Brady's regarded, 7 Super Bowls, greatest of all time, all that. They weren't second play guys, right? If the first play went down, if the first play fell apart, they were getting sacked or they were dirting the ball, right? They were throwing the ball away. What and Mahomes does this as well, but maybe not, not he uses his legs when he needs to, whereas Lamar and Josh Allen, it's a colossal part of what they do. And obviously both quarterbacks, you made the remark as far as Allen compared to John Elway. Elway, even in his prime from an athleticism standpoint, was never a design run kind of guy. Scramble, yes, but they weren't calling plays for him as a design runner very often. Whereas Lamar and Josh Allen, that happens regularly. That happens multiple times a game. Some games more than others, but it's just when the play breaks down and you're ad-libbing and it's the second play, these guys just put such extraordinary stress on the opposition to, one, make sure they don't get out of the pocket. Two, if they do, to get them downfield. So it's a 10-yard run. You don't want to turn it into a 40-yard run. And the other factor that makes both these guys so deadly is you have to plaster guys in coverage. I mean, this is where Lamar, who was great 5 years ago, has become otherworldly in the sense that he can escape. And 5 years ago, he was, for the most part, content to just take off and run then, as far as the second play. And that was great. And highlight plays, and we can think of all the different plays he made doing that. But now, as he's gotten older, as he's in his seventh year, yes, he still has the ability to take off and scramble, and he'll still do that, and he'll still run for 50 yards if you don't get him down to the ground. But his eyes are still looking downfield, and you'll see him hold the ball. I mean, we saw this in Cincinnati earlier this year. I mean, he had the ball for like what, 11 seconds, whatever it was. Cincinnati played it perfectly. You can't draw it up any better than how they played it. And then he rips your heart out throwing a ball to the end zone for a touchdown. And Josh Allen did that on the fourth down play against Denver on Sunday. I mean, think about that. That was fourth and short, and suddenly you're kind of, if you're looking at that play, you're thinking, oh wow, Denver has this well covered. And then he throws a 30-yard pass to a running back. And Ty Johnson does an amazing job keeping his feet in bounds and getting the touchdown. I mean, those are the kind of plays, plays like that, plays like we see Lamar make on a weekly basis where he's scrambling around and guys are covered, they're covered. And then because no defense can cover for 15 seconds or 10 seconds, then someone gets open. And these guys just, the second play, sometimes a third play within the play. I mean, they're so good. They're so special in that way. And that's where, you think about the history of the game, okay, Fran Tarkenton, I mean, Michael Vick, I mean, you can
Steve
certainly
Brogan ran around for a minute
Randall
successfully.
Cunningham,
Yeah.
I don't want to say that they didn't exist, but I don't know if any of those guys did it quite like these two guys do it, and throw Mahomes in there as well. Even though Mahomes isn't as apt to take off and run quite as frequently, but he'll run around and scramble and wait and
I
wait.
would throw Brett Favre in there too, just from an inspirational standpoint as to what happens to throw the ball when the play breaks down, actually
Yeah,
getting rid of the ball.
no, I would agree with that. Only the difference is, Favre didn't have the mobility that these guys do, in the sense that Favre would run around and scramble and throw, but he wasn't going to run for 50 yards, whereas these guys still have the ability to do that, right? And in the case of Josh Allen, you love to talk about Lamar running into linebackers over the years. I mean, Josh Allen doesn't just run into linebackers; he bulldozes linebackers. He's 245, 250 pounds, whatever he is. But I mean, these two guys are just unbelievable to watch, and that's why, as as nerve-wracking as it is for Ravens fans specifically and Bills fans specifically, because of the high stakes of this game. If you're just talking about this as a football fan, just as a pure entertainment value standpoint, I mean, this is incredible to get this. I mean, we saw it in the playoffs 4 years ago. At that point, neither guy was the quarterback that they are now. And that's saying something, because Lamar was already an MVP quarterback at that point in his career. But both these guys have just, their games have matured. They've gotten, both are better from the pocket. I mean, they just, both these guys can just kill you in a variety of ways. And that's where, you look at a game like this and just say, man, and it's got to play out that way, right? I mean, the Ravens, if Derrick Henry runs for 200 yards, they're going to blow him out again, probably. I mean, and it's not, I'm not going to sit here and say that that's impossible, because they did it in week 4. I'm not expecting that. I'm expecting the Bills to be better defensively than they were in week 4.
It's not a
But
bad game plan. That is the game plan, to go run some
I
more.
mean,
That was the
until they
game plan
stop
against
it,
Pittsburgh.
sure, yeah. I mean, I'm not going to sit here. I mean, I don't think
If the
that means
game's 14-10 and you're losing at halftime because you ran too much, I don't know, run some more.
well,
you
then
know?
then it might just be, well, you might run, but it might be Lamar with the ball in his hands and he's looking to throw and he takes off. Then, I mean, again, that's where these teams, these quarterbacks are so difficult, because you can stop one element of what they do, but then they can beat you 3 other ways. And that's where you look even with the running backs. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not putting James Cook and Derrick Henry's category, But James Cook's really good. If you watch him play, my fantasy football team was happy to have him this year as I won my league. He was fantastic. But you just look at these teams with the running game and with what these quarterbacks do as passers, playing from the pocket, yes, but more so again those second plays. When the play breaks down initially because of pressure or because no one's open or whatever, what they can do in terms of ad libbing and improvisation, it really is extraordinary. I mean, again, that's where I said wherever these guys ultimately rank all time 15 years from now, who knows? A lot has to be written between now and then for both of them. But in terms of just their skill set and how unique they both are as just quarterback talents, man, they're on a short list of some of the all-time unique quarterbacks. And again, throw Mahomes in there as well. I'm not trying to sell him short, but he's not involved in this week's game. So I'm looking forward to it. I think you could tell how excited I am, and I think everyone is. I mean, these are the games you wait and talk about all year for the potential for it to happen, knowing both teams have to stay healthy and both teams have to win in the wild card round, and both teams want to be in a position that you're playing your best football. And it feels like both these teams are at that point. So I mean, game on. I can't wait, and I expect this game to have the potential to be an all-time kind of playoff instant classic.
Luke Jones is here. It's certainly been a weird week, playing LA, Minnesota games in Phoenix and the fires last week and all that going on. I don't know how many folks are planning on going up to Buffalo this weekend. It certainly was a rowdy home crowd the other night. And, I heard other people talking about the game as being boring for a Pittsburgh Baltimore game, third, fourth quarter. I didn't tweet a lot late in the game because there wasn't like a lot. The game really wasn't in doubt once it hit 21, right? Like right, before the half, the second half kind of, you didn't think the Steelers even had it in them to get back in the game, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think put it this way. To their credit, they had their 98-yard touchdown drive and they finally hit some big plays, which, it's something the Ravens need to clean up. That was the most big plays we've seen the Ravens pass defense give up in quite a long time. So I think that was at least a little bit of a cautionary tale that, hey, Buffalo and Kansas City is paying attention to that, as far as what could happen these next couple weeks, if you do win Sunday in advance. But yeah, when they had their 98-yard touchdown drive and then Lamar gets sacked on first down of the ensuing drive, there was a morsel of nervous energy that I think everyone's like, okay, you're holding your breath. And then the Ravens scored a touchdown on 3 plays after that. I mean, it was game over at that point. But hey, that was kind of the story of Wild Card Weekend, though, right? I mean, Washington, Tampa Bay on Sunday night ended up being a good game, and Washington's kicker doinks the game-winning field goal off the upright and through. But I think the most surprising game of the weekend was the Texans beating the Chargers the way they did. I think everyone thought there was a chance that could be the final score, but it'd be the opposite. I think people thought the Chargers had
A
the
weird
chance to.
week for anybody in LA and
Yeah,
evacuating
yeah,
and moving
no
around. Like
question.
I don't. I think about it that way with kids and dogs, and there's a fire. Like until you've seen a fire like that, and I've only seen one once in my life. Like I
It's
was out in
terrifying.
Yellowstone and saw it. Like it's just an unbelievable thing. And no excuses for the Chargers or whatever they got beat and Herbert throwing the picks and all of that. But I even think for the Rams, I just think in a general sense, I give the Chargers a pass in that way. And going on the road and doing, but it wasn't a good. That wasn't indicative of who the team was this year for them, and it creates a messy offseason for Ortiz and for Jim Harbaugh too, and certainly for Herbert.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I go as far as giving them a pass. I don't think I'd agree with that. But look, it's real life, right? I mean, at the end of the day, what's going on in Southern California right now? I mean, football's, the Rams are playing in Arizona on Monday night. Or they're playing the Monday night game in one of their division rival stadiums when you think about it in that way. And, good on the Cardinals for opening up the doors to them, to their practice facility and all that. But yeah,
It's been a weird
that's a real
week.
life
That's
thing.
all.
No,
In
no,
general.
I hear you. I hear you. I think the thing for me for the Chargers, since you brought it up and since there's
Well,
so
it's a
many
have to.
former,
I mean, we're going to talk about the Chargers and how they looked awful. I'm like, you do know everybody in their world. They've left wives home and dog, like
I
evacuate.
understand.
Like, just it really.
No, I
I think it's really tough to play football. Like, and especially when they might not have been good enough to begin with, right?
Well, and see, that's the part here where I kind of look at this and say, well, who's their offensive coordinator? Greg Roman. What did we always talk about with Greg Roman's offense when it got to January? Didn't have enough answers. Didn't. And I think the Chargers had a great year. There's nothing for them to be ashamed of. While Justin Herbert is not in the same class whatsoever as Mahomes, Lamar, Josh Allen, or even Joe Burrow for that matter in the AFC, he had a good year, had a nightmare night on Saturday throwing 4 picks. But I think the big thing for them is, to me, they're another legitimate, serious, high impact skill player away, maybe two, because I think J.K. Dobbins had a good year, but is J.K. going to be your bell cow
He's
running
not
back?
Derrick Henry. As I wear my Derrick Henry jersey, as
Sure.
I've said,
Well,
like
and look,
he's a one of one Henry.
and
He
look,
is.
a nod to Dobbins for coming back, off the injury run that he had the last 3 years, and he had a really good good season for them, and he was their best running back. But I think they're a high impact skill player or two away from potentially being in that, potentially having the chance to join the top tier in the AFC. But yeah, that game was surprising. Ravens Steelers. The outcome wasn't surprising, but the way that the Steelers looked, I mean, they looked like a team that had very little interest in being there. I mean, that's what was, and I saw a number of people make this comment either Saturday night or Sunday, as we were kind of talking about these other games and waiting for these other games to begin. But I think it was just the eyeball test of what that looked like. There have been lopsided Ravens Steelers games before. We've seen them. You and I have both, we've lived it, we've watched it, covered it.
In both directions.
Yeah, yeah. But very few games where you would say, wow, the Ravens needed looked like they needed a heart transplant. Like the 2007 game, you could say that, the Monday night game, but also that team was so injured at that point. I mean, look at who was playing in the secondary at that point in time. But you could count on one hand the number of games that were so bad where you said, wow, that's the kind of game that gets someone fired. That's how ugly that was. And that was that game on Saturday night. I mean, the fact that people are talking about Mike Tomlin's future, and obviously there's history, in recent Januaries for them on top of that, but that was ugly. That was really ugly on their part. And hey, give the Ravens credit. The Ravens were way better than the Steelers. On paper, we said that all year. That's why the losing 8 of 10 to the Steelers over the last 5 years was so perplexing, because on paper, the Ravens have been better than them every year, right? I
Well,
mean, with a
Marvin
healthy
leads the
Lamar.
world in losing playoff games, right? And Tomlin's catching up to him at this point.
Yeah,
And the thing with Marvin is I look at those seven and I'm thinking there are only two where they really had the better team. And one of them was when Carson Palmer got his leg broken in the
right,
first minute.
right.
And then, the next time was certainly the Vontaze Perfect. They could have won, right? So you look at those games and say, where were they embarrassed? Were they felt like they went to Houston and lost every year, those Bengals teams? And I
Yeah.
thought most of those times I never thought they had a minute with Andy Dalton and a minute with Carson Palmer. I look at these Steelers teams. Tell me which team was good. None of
I
them.
no, I
None of them.
understand. I understand that, but then you know, then you start to talk about, like, okay, well, why aren't you any better?
Well, because you're picking the wrong players,
Well,
right?
you need to get them, right? I,
Yeah.
I mean, and again, I hear the whole, I wholeheartedly agree. And let's be clear. And I don't say this as a knock on John Harbaugh, because I think very highly of Mike Tomlin. I do. I don't think he's beyond reproach. The last few weeks I had called him out on some of these white flag punts that he's had in the fourth quarter, like he did against Philly. He did that against the Ravens in Week 16. But his long-term success speaks for itself. But what is happening with Mike Tomlin right now is exactly what we were talking about with John Harbaugh before Lamar Jackson showed up. I mean, the Ravens had missed the playoffs 3 years in a row. Um, if Lamar doesn't show up, I'm guessing John Harbaugh is not the head coach in Baltimore right now, right? Because things weren't getting any better with Joe Flacco at that point. So even if you went down the road with Joe another year or two, you were kind of in a position of where Pittsburgh is right now, that you're never so bad that you've got a chance to draft the next Patrick Mahomes, but you're not good enough to really feel like you have a chance to, even if you make the playoffs, to make noise. The Ravens were in that purgatory position for, from most of 2013 through 2018. And if the Ravens didn't draft Lamar Jackson, I mean, and they would have drafted someone else, but there's no telling it that it was going to be Lamar Jackson. It might have been Daniel Jones, right? It might have been like someone like that, and it doesn't work out. John Harbaugh probably wouldn't be the head coach here at this point, and it would have been a similar story in the way that it was for Andy Reid decade plus ago in Philly, where you just say, "We love you," but it kind of feels like it's run its course. It feels like both of us could benefit from a clean break. And is Pittsburgh getting to that point right now? I mean, maybe. I mean, we're going to see how it plays out. I mean, but they got to pick better players. They've got to evolve. My criticism of Mike Tomlin beyond their roster and understanding he has influence would also be the way that they want to play, where they talk about their defense and the way that they drag the other team down into the mud, in the way that they have successfully done it to the Ravens, but overall they haven't been wildly successful doing that over the last 8 years, 6 years, whatever you want to, whatever timeline you want to use. They've got to evolve. They're still trying to win games like it's 1999, and that's where I give the Ravens credit in the recognition that started at the end of the Ozzie Newsome era and has continued with Eric DeCosta as general manager. That they've understood that you got to do things differently than you did when Ray Lewis and Ed Reed were on your team, and that was one of my big complaints. How much did you hear me criticize the Ravens roster building post Super Bowl 47? As much as everyone, the lazy narrative was, oh, well, Joe Flacco's making all this money. They made a lot of bad decisions from a philosophical standpoint in terms of how they allocated their resources, where they were trying to keep their defense playing at a high level, which I get, but you can't do it to the point where your offense is suffering to the degree that it did in those years for the Ravens. So I think Pittsburgh's going through that right now. They need more talent. I mean, obviously they need to find a franchise quarterback. That's priority number one. But
By the way,
they
you
need,
said Daniel Jones, and I didn't know if you were pulling it out because you never just whip anything out. But Dwayne Haskins was one of the other
yeah,
quarterbacks in that draft. And I guess the Ravens, not guess, I know. I mean, I haven't talked to Eric in a long time, but I've talked to Eric for hundreds of hours of my life, even though he treats me like a stranger at this point. And talking about all of this and evaluating the Matt Ryan, Joe Flacco thing that I wrote about in 2008 back in Purple Rain 2, the notion that once the round got through and they drafted Hayden Hurst and they thought, well, are we going to get a guy next year? Who's in line next year, Eric? Oh, nobody. And there's Kyler Murray, who was a 1-1. And I still look at that and say Baker Mayfield's a one. There's a lot of 1-1s out there that didn't make it. And then you have Sam Darnold. You see, different guys like that.
yeah,
But the notion that they went in on Lamar was, to your point, and if you're writing Purple Rain 3 and I'm egging you on, that at that moment on that draft night, they knew they had a lame duck older quarterback with a big salary that they needed to move on from. They realized, and this is probably Bisciotti spitting downward, saying, we're not signing Kirk Cousins. We're not
yeah,
going out and we're not getting that guy. We're not getting someone else's reject. I'm trying to think of other quarterbacks. Name a dozen of them. Name any of those guys you can't win with. Russell Wilson, maybe one of them, right?
yeah.
We're not doing that. And Russell Wilson would have been a different story in 2018, 2019. But at that moment, there was Lamar versus the field in next year's
Yeah,
draft versus where they were, and they took a flyer on Lamar in the last pick of the draft. I mean, and obviously it was something they talked about in March and April
sure,
and went
sure.
on, and now it's their geniuses and all. They were geniuses, they would have took him at 27.
Right. I mean,
If they were geniuses on Ray Lewis, they would have took him instead of Ogden. So or right. I mean, there is a point where revisionist history is like a Rubik's cube a little bit, but
oh,
they
it's
the brilliance in the Lamar thing, as you've pointed out, is the deft way that they've handled allocating resources, offense, defense, analytics that DeCosta talked to me about for years. He's the one that got Sig Mejdal and Mike Elias hired, I swear. Ask him about it when you see him out doing one of his charity things. Seriously, like Eric DeCosta's analytic studies of the Yankees and the Astros and reading Astro Ball has led to all of this. It really has. I haven't talked to Eric in 3 years, but I used to talk to him about it regularly. He didn't talk to anybody. Maybe Garrett Downing or Ryan Mink can get this out of him at some point. But there is a point for all of this that this organization, because it's one mind, it's been the same leadership for 3 decades, much like the Steelers. The Steelers think that they have it figured out because they never lose, right? They're always in the playoffs. They're always above 500. They don't have 3 and 14s because they're too smart for that. But they until you figure the quarterback out, you can be as smart as you want to be, right?
You can have a high floor, but your ceiling's not going to be very high, right? And that's where the Steelers are right now. And look, there's a luck element to it. I mean, go ask Brian Billick about drafting a quarterback. They drafted Kyle Bowler, and it's why Billick was gone 4 years later, right? I
Honest to
mean,
God, the first time they put that kid on a film and John Harbaugh looked up at him, John's thinking, no, no, no. He runs in a line, but no, no, no. He didn't throw the ball as well. He's not as accurate. I can hear John making excuses or reasons to say, maybe not. Now, when it comes longer chat, John would say, now we draft him. Who's our lineman? Who are what do we who's our running? Like what if we're gonna have that kind of quarterback, I'll start to open my mind to the
yeah,
revolution. I'm being John Harbaugh in
sure.
2018 when he's got an old quarterback and no help, and like all the problems that we saw here in 2017 and 18 when they weren't making the playoffs and they were an also ran team.
Hmm.
The notion that we're just going to take Lamar, one of the reasons no one wanted him 2 years ago was what you would need to do to completely revamp everything you're doing to have different kind of offensive linemen, a different kind of running game. I said from the beginning, dude, I don't want to pat myself on the back too much while I wear a Derrick Henry jersey, but I should get my Mark Ingram jersey out because I was a big fan of the Ingram thing in the beginning because Ingram was a man and Ingram ran the ball. And Ingram ran the ball better than any of the rest of these guys really ran. Any of the Dobbins, any of the Gusses. And I liked all of them. But to me, that fat back, that big back thing, I talked about it for years until they got Derrick Henry. And now I think they can go win a Super Bowl because they needed to build this differently with Lamar. Because if Lamar gets off the bus Saturday night in Buffalo with J.K. Dobbins or even Josh Jacobs, pick anybody you want. Pick Emmett Smith.
I mean,
Pick,
they did go 13-4 last year.
but they can't. But winning these games,
See, I
if they would
look,
have ran the ball
there
more last year in the AFC Championship, maybe they would have won. Maybe with what they had, right? A Gimpy,
or
Dobbins.
Lamar just needed to play better, and Zay Flowers needed to not fumble the ball going over the goal line. I mean, I believe me, I hear it. And look, you've been your opinion, and let's be clear. I mean, Derrick Henry wasn't Justin Forsett, right? I mean, this is a Hall of Fame running back. So, to sit here and say that the Ravens, that Derrick Henry wouldn't be a great fit in Baltimore was never, that was never in question. But
It was
it,
in question because people thought he didn't have any tread left, too. And they wouldn't have tread this time of year. That if he
I mean, I
ran
thought that
for
was,
1,900 yards, he'd be too beaten up.
yeah.
That
I
hasn't
mean,
happened here.
oh, but I guess the point I was making with that, and again, I'll go back. I haven't hid from this. I wasn't the guy that was banging the table for Derrick Henry because they've had a great running game every year, even with they had a really good running game with Latavius Murray and Devontae Freeman, right? I mean, so my thought would always be allocate your resources elsewhere. Derrick Henry's been phenomenal. I'm not going to sit here and argue, suggest otherwise. I always thought he would put up big numbers, because of Lamar Jackson. And Derrick Henry said as much himself. Go look at Derrick Henry's yards before contact average this year. It's a career high. Why do you think that is? It's not the Ravens' historic offensive line. It's Lamar Jackson, right? So, but I mean, I I don't think I will continue to reject strongly that their fatal flaw and the reason why they lost to the Titans in 2019 or their fatal flaw last year was that they needed to have an 1,800-yard back. Now, they they might win the Super Bowl this year, but I think it's also simplistic just to always break it down to one variable. The reason why you lose, there are multiple things that happen, right? they've lost 5 games with Derrick Henry this year. So, that speaks to the point that I was just making, that
And
they
Derrick
had a
Henry
better.
has been bottled up early in games. And when I talk to really smart football people, they'll say you can scheme to stop Derrick Henry, but then your corners better cover, and your
Sure.
linebackers better get on Andrews and better get on Likely,
Well,
right?
and
I
that's
mean,
and that's really the beauty of this offense. But it's all because of Lamar Jackson. I mean, it's all because of Lamar
I'd
Jackson.
love this argument with you if they win the Super Bowl because you've been so Lamar and I've been so Derek. And
Well,
I even
who's the
joked
M-
last week in
Nestor?
one of
Who's
our
the MVP?
experts that you think it's all Lamar and I think and we're both wrong.
I mean, let me be. No, no, no. If the question is it's all one or the other, no, that's not. But if you're going to ask me, is Lamar Jackson more responsible for Derrick Henry's success this year, or is it the other way around? I'm absolutely 1,000 times out of 1,000 going to tell you that Lamar Jackson is the bigger reason why Derrick Henry is a 1,900-yard back this year, more so than Lamar is going to win another MVP, because Lamar won 2 MVPs without Derrick Henry, right? So, the point, and again, I don't want to
I'm happy
emphasize.
he's on the team Sunday night getting off the
Sure,
bus. I
I am
I like
too.
that more than any other thing you've ever said here. Latavius Murray. I mean, that's when you start to, you know, really point out the other options out there. And, even the point
That
where
they still had a
Zeitler,
number one running rushing attack with
well,
those
Zeitler and
guys.
Moses aren't here. Like it has been different. And, Ronnie Stanley, cost him 30 yards on Saturday night that didn't matter. But, um, the running game and this punch and these two guys, if they win the Super Bowl, I will not be shocked. And I'm not going to be the guy betting
Should
against them.
be.
But I also really see what Buffalo represents at home. I see what Kansas City represents at home. And
Mhm.
if they win the Super Bowl, they will be an all timer. Despite their 5 losses, despite the ugliness of the Raiders and Browns losses and the Steelers loss, which doesn't look good because the Steelers to me look like a 5-win team the last 5 weeks, right? They look like if
Yeah.
the season started again tomorrow and they had to play 17 fresh weeks, they'd be 5-12.
I mean, yeah, because they were a team looking like they needed a heart transplant. But what you just said, I mean, the 2000 team went 5 straight games without scoring a touchdown, right? The 2012 team lost 4 of their last 5 games. And we all remember Joe Flacco planking against Denver in Baltimore,
This team hasn't had any sort of ignominy other than losing to Philadelphia at home,
yeah, I
which they
mean,
might get a chance to avenge in 3 weeks.
well, and that's, part of what, and this is where we kind of go back to, laying out the reasons why the Ravens have such a great chance to do this despite being on the road the next 2 weeks. Again, making the assumption that Kansas City wins. They might not, who knows, but I'm not going to sit here and hold my breath that the Texans are going to beat them. But, the reason why they have a chance to go to Buffalo and win that game, and go to Kansas City and win that game, and go to the Super Bowl and win that game, is not just because they have Lamar Jackson, which is a massive part of it, not just because they have Derrick Henry, which is a massive part of it, not just because they have 7 other Pro Bowl players, which is a massive part of it, and not just because they have Todd Monken as their offense coordinator, who has been outstanding, not just because they have a Super Bowl winning coach. This team's really healthy. I mean, Zay Flowers right now, and that one hurts, don't get me wrong, but how many times, even last year, and they were healthy last year, but at this time last year, they had a Mark Andrews that was trying to get back playing on one leg. They had already lost Keaton Mitchell for the year. They had lost some other players here and there. They had some other guys that were, Marlon Humphrey was banged up most of the year. Marcus Williams was banged up, and Marcus Williams was still, when he was on the field, still playing at a higher level at that point, not the guy that's inactive every week now. Um, you know, and that was a really healthy team, but they had their injuries. That's where, like, as much as the timing stinks with this Zay Flowers thing, and we'll see if he plays on Sunday night. You can't sit here and complain about the Ravens' injury fortune, because it's been exceptional. And by the way, they've invested a lot of resources into sports science and recovery and their training staff. And we know about how they fired Steve Saunders, and we remember the NFLPA report card a couple years ago. They reacted to that, and I commend them for that, because there are lots of organizations in the NFL, lots of billionaires who try to get cheap with stuff like that, which is crazy because, one, it's not that insanely expensive. but you just need to hire the right people and understand nutrition matters, strength training matters, our training staffs matter, our resources for players with rest and recovery matter. But and there's no salary cap for those things. You can invest as much as you want into those things. The Ravens have absolutely committed, and I don't think it's a coincidence that the last couple of years they've been able to stay healthy. Now, there is luck involved in that. I don't care how great you are with those things. If your star quarterback has his left tackle roll into his knee in the way that James Hurst did to Joe Flacco 10 years ago, it's going to tear his ACL, right? I mean, I guess unless you're Patrick Mahomes, who looks like Gumby, the way he gets rolled up and then he's fine a week later. But, there's luck involved. But this team's, their health is such a huge part of what they've done. Go look at the Ravens week one roster. Normally, you look at the week one roster when you get to this point in the year where, whether you're talking week 18 or the playoffs, and it looks different. You say, man, I missed that guy, that guy, and that guy. And it'd be great to have that guy. And oh, that's our top backup defensive back. Oh, we'd love to have him. They haven't had Arthur Millette. Oh, okay, I'll give you that one. But you look at their week one roster, it's basically the same other than, hey, Keaton Mitchell's back. Even though they're not doing a whole lot with him other than just as a kick returner. So
And that's almost impossible to do.
right. And that right there, despite the fact that they have to go on the road this week and presumably next week, that's where you look at this and say, man, that's where you really want to take advantage because you don't know if you're going to have an offensive line that all five guys started the entire year the way that they did this year. And you don't know if, they've already lived 2 years where Lamar didn't stay healthy late in the year. 2021, when their defense was completely ravaged by injuries. That stuff can happen and stuff will happen, right? I mean, they're not going to have healthy
Who's
years
not
like
going to
this.
be on this team next year other than maybe Derrick Henry, right? I mean, like that.
I mean, I think Derrick Henry will be. I mean, the question, for one, he's under contract. The question is going to be, do they try to work that deal to add another year or two onto it to make it a little better
Good.
from a
I'm
cap
glad I bought
standpoint?
the jersey. It gives me another year to wear it in case
Yeah,
things
I
go
mean,
wrong.
I mean, how could you not? Look, even though, I was someone that was a little more I never hated the move. Let's be clear. And, I never sat there and said, I don't like this move.
Well, you're thinking
It
of the
was,
money. That's
I
all
was
you're
more
thinking.
like, hey, what does this mean for your O line? What does this mean for getting a pass rusher? Things like that. Allocation of resources is
Unlike the
always
Orioles, who can spend whatever they want on relief pitching in this year.
sure,
Maybe they will,
sure.
maybe they won't. Right.
We'll get to Andrew Kittredge, but that's where this feels like even though they're on the road and even though Buffalo's really good and even though Kansas City's the Chiefs are the Chiefs, as healthy as they are, as complete as their roster is right now, man, it's another one of those like last year. This isn't do or die, right? Lamar is healthy enough and young enough and great enough to assume they'll have more shots at this. But when you look at the collective, how healthy this team is, how complete this roster is, save for a couple positions here and there. I mean, this is a great opportunity. It really is. And you don't want to you don't want to squander too many of those because you're going to have some years like 21 where everyone got hurt, including Lamar at the end of the year. So, man, it's sitting right there. Even going on the road with this offense, I'll go on the road against anyone and like my chances. So we'll see how it plays out on Sunday night. But man, it's a pretty special group, and they've got a chance from a narrative standpoint to really do something really special here these next few weeks.
1 point dog on Sunday night, the last game in a 4-game weekend for the NFL divisional play. By the way, snow in the forecast in Buffalo Sunday. I just checked it out. Middle of the day, 1 to 2 inches. It's early in the week. It's lake effect. It's probably going to snow at some point on Saturday or Sunday in Buffalo. We'll see how it goes. If you're going up to the game, bundle up. Luke and I will be here all week. We're going to get some baseball in here. I'm going to be back and forth to Buffalo all week with all sorts of guests lined up. Vic Carucci's coming on. Just all the Buffalo Mafia is coming on. All the Bills Mafia will be here this week, as well as some NFL Hall of Fame voters as well. So a great week of radio, a great week out at Baltimore Positive. It's almost old school Nasty Nest. You're going to get a lot of sports this week, despite the fact that there's a political event happening by the end of the week here as well that I'm hoping to ignore and stay focused. Stick into sports. That's what we do. Stick to sports. He's Luke. I'm Nestor. We'll get the Crab Cake Tour back out on the road. Brought to you by the Maryland Lottery. We have a couple Super Bowl coming up as well. It's just a huge week here. It's Lamar and King Henry. We're WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We never stop talking Baltimore Positive.